Good afternoon. I'll give you about a 6 out of 10. Let's see if we can work on it. So, how to be future ready. This is the challenge. This is the challenge for futurists. Let me ask you a question to start with. Who thinks that change is happening faster now than at any point in the past? I'm going with Alok's math that this is about 95% again. Whoever feels like they want to get off. So I'm going to tell you a story about why you feel that way. Why it feels like change is happening faster now. I'm going to try and offer you a solution about what you might want to do about it. So as Mike said, I am an applied futurist. If you've not made one before, it's because I made it up 5 years ago. But it's a serious job. My job is to help organizations around the world to respond to this feeling of what I'll come to explain as high-frequency change. And I get to do that for all sorts of organizations, from the likes of Kellogg's and Accenture and McAfee. And I get to muck around on the telly and the radio a lot as well, which is great fun, but terribly paid. So I also come and do things like this. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about that sense of accelerated change, what I call high-frequency change. I'm going to qualify that idea that change is happening faster now than at any point in the past. I'm going to talk about what drives it, what gives us that feeling. I'm going to try and offer you a solution, the beginnings of a solution, something you can take back to your businesses, something you can start to do about it. Okay? It's like a Mexican wave, that. It started over here and went all the way over here. So this question, is the world spinning faster now? Let me give you a qualified yes. I think, and you have to forgive me because I'm an engineer, change happens in waves. It doesn't just have one dimension of speed. It has two important dimensions: amplitude and frequency. And the change that we saw in the last century was change of great amplitude. What do I mean by this? Look at some of the big changes that we saw. The shift from the horse and cart to the car. This was a change that didn't just remove unpleasant stuff from our streets. It was a change that reshaped our cities. It reshaped our working lives. It reshaped leisure. This was a huge scale of change. Look at the advent of international travel. If I look slightly punchy up here at some point, it's because I'm still suffering from jet lag from flying in from the UK yesterday. I did actually sneak a little nap earlier. But think about the level of change that this brought about. The idea that I can just jump on a plane and come and speak at a conference thousands of miles away. That idea is really only maybe 50 years old, that it would be practical, fast enough, cheap enough to come and do that. This is a big scale of change. It's brought the different cities of our world together. It's connected us. It's created a global culture even before the internet came along. And perhaps my favorite example, domestic automation. This comes from the first project I did as a futurist. I worked with LG. We looked at the future of domestic automation. And we started by looking at the past. And in the UK, and I'm sure it's the same here and in the US, we used to spend 63 hours a week on housework. And we now spend 2. Think about the check. Quite right, round of applause for the washing machine manufacturers of the world. Think about the change that's brought about. The people it's released into the workforce. The time it's released for leisure. Who is in the leisure industry? Anyone in the leisure industry? Because you wouldn't have a business if it wasn't for this. We wouldn't have time. It's bad enough looking after doing all the washing for 2 small kids if we didn't have one of these things. Seems to be a running theme of people with 2 small kids here today. This century is different. The 21st century is not about change of great amplitude. It's about change at high frequency. Smaller shocks that are coming very, very rapidly. Maybe not of the same scale as the washing machine or the car or the aeroplane, but big enough to disrupt whole industries, whole companies, whole sectors at great rates. I'll give you some practical examples. So this is a great chart. This is a chart that comes from a company called Insight. This looks at the S&P 500 in the US and how long a company can expect to spend at the top of the stock market in the US after it joins, based on rolling 7-year averages. What you can see is if you joined the S&P 500 back in 1960, you could expect to be there for 60 years. You had a nice long roadmap ahead of you. Your business was stable. You joined the S&P 500. Now, you can expect to be there for 20 years. Much more rapid disruption, much faster turnover. Why is this? Look at how fast we adopt new products, new systems, services, and technologies, the things on which those companies are based. The landline phone in the US went from launch to the 90th percentile in 80 years. That seems pretty rapid until you look what happened to the mobile phone, which did it in 20, and the smartphone, which did it in 10, and Facebook, which probably did it in about 5, and whatever finally kills Facebook off will probably do it in about 2. And then my favorite case study of this of all, and I can give you loads more of these. It's my favorite because I get to show Mike Tyson falling off a hoverboard. Now, the hoverboard first appeared in about spring 2015. It was about April, May 2015. And it appeared under the feet of the likes of Justin Bieber and various other rappers. One of them, I think, got arrested trying to ride through an airport on one. And it was generally sort of gold-plated, and it cost you about $4,000. Your classic early adopters. Within 3 months, you could pick one up on a market stall in the West Midlands of the UK, where I'm from, for about $300. The Chinese manufacturers had ramped up at an incredible scale. The parts had been commoditized, the designs had been plagiarized, and it was a mass market product. My cousin actually got arrested riding one on his chest through the centre of a city centre in the UK, which is when I first really learned about how controversial they were. 3 months later, the British government pointed out that these things weren't actually legal. You couldn't ride one in a park, you couldn't ride one in a city centre, you couldn't ride it on a pavement. In fact, the only place you could ride a hoverboard was on your own private land. And since most of us aren't like the Queen, apparently has stayed here, and we don't have huge parks of our own, these things basically became obsolete. No one wanted one. What was predicted to be the most stocking filler stretching thing you've ever seen would have been some very strange Christmas stockings. Just disappeared into obscurity almost overnight. A 6-month hype cycle for a new technology product. There, hot, gone. And this is what I mean by high-frequency change. And this is why so many of the companies, the big brands that we know, are struggling to keep up. These trends are coming and going, battering them, and they've got no time to respond. So that's high-frequency change. But if you're curious like me, the next question you have to ask is, what's driving it? What is the force behind this accelerated change? For me, there's one answer. It's technology. Technology not in the sort of bits and bytes sense, not the phones, the tablets, the computers. They're part of it. But technology in a much broader sense. Technology is the systematic application of our understanding of the world. That's what technology really is. Ever since the first Australopithecus afarensis, 3.5 million years ago, I think I've said that right, realized that they could use a rock as a tool or sharpen a bone, that they could make their lives easier. Disassembling animals, I think, as the chap from CISPRO called it. That's what technology's done. It's made our lives easier. If you like, technology is a lubricant. And trust me, when you search for technology and lubricant, this is not the first photo that comes up. Turn on Safe Search, people. Turn on Safe Search. So technology lowers friction, and we know that it accelerates things. That's not the only thing it does. Every industry I've looked at, and as Mike said, I've worked with charities and governments and health services and big corporations and startups, and everywhere I go, my favorite one, I went from super yachts to supermarkets in a week. That was a heck of a turnaround. Technology does 5 things. 5 vectors of change, if you like. Every market it touches. The second one, after acceleration, is what we call ubiquity, because technology has an accelerating effect on itself. Technology makes itself easier to access. You heard of Moore's Law? 50-something years ago, Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, worked out that the number of transistors you could economically fit on a silicon chip doubled every 2 years. And what that really means is the bang for buck we get out of technology doubles every 2 years. Because amazingly, it doesn't just apply to chips. It applies to the bandwidth you get from your mobile phone or your broadband. It applies to how much storage you can fit in your MP3 player, if anybody even has one of those anymore. And this results in some really silly things, because technology gets so cheap and so accessible that people put it in everything. Like this $8 digital soap dispenser, which I genuinely got suckered into buying last week. My kids love it. And if your kids are anything like mine, and their bathroom is just a field of soap, this is actually the solution. But come on, it's ridiculous. But it also gets really serious. A conversation I've had with a few people today, been talking about automation. I heard this morning talk about the idea of the self-driving accountant. Well, these are some of the predictions of what people think technology will do to jobs around the world. And they range from the most conservative, recent figures from the OECD, that reckon 14% of jobs are susceptible to automation, through to the most aggressive, from Oxford University's Management School, potentially 47%. Now, this obviously varies geography to geography, state to state, sector to sector. But there are parts of the US where you've got huge numbers of driving jobs, which the most popular job is driving a truck. Parts of the UK where almost everyone works in retail or a call centre. I helped to introduce a technology into a part of government in the UK that we reckon could replace 80% of call centre jobs. So these figures, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And technology is even getting into unexpected sectors. The price of technology is falling so fast, and its accessibility is coming up so quickly, that it's getting into places where we thought we probably never even want technology, like care. I'm working with a company at the moment who's offering to put monitoring devices into people's homes, people who aren't quite ready to go into care yet, but who are at risk. Keeping an eye on their activity, the temperature, the humidity. Is the heating coming on? Are they in fuel poverty? The price of these devices? $4 a month. No upfront cost, $4 a month. That price is so low that everyone we talk to just goes, why wouldn't you do this? Apart from the privacy concerns. The third one of these factors is diversity. Because technology lowers the barriers to entry and raises accessibility, you just get more. More stuff, more competition at every layer in the value chain. And again, this is universal. It touches every sector I've looked at, including children's television. Now, how much this anecdote rings true for you, I don't know. But I'm showing my age here. When I was a child, we had 2 television channels to choose from in the UK when I got home that showed children's programs. We had the BBC, and you're all familiar with the BBC. And we had ITV, the commercial station. And because I was thoroughly middle class, my only option was the BBC. And I used to come home, and I'd watch the telly, and then I'd get booted upstairs while my sister watched some terrible Australian soap. I'd watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. I have always been a geek. My kids come home from school, and they pick up a remote that looks not dissimilar to this. They don't say, hey, goo-goo, choo-choo. They're slightly older than that now. But they can choose from about 10,000 different shows across 5 different digital platforms. And the result of this is really interesting because it goes beyond just what they veg out in front of the sofa watching. It affects what they do when they go to school. So my youngest, when she was still at nursery, went to school one day on a day where they could all dress up as their favourite character from television. And the result of this was they all dressed up as characters from completely different universes. Apart from the obligatory 2 Captain Americas and a Hulk. It was, how do I integrate a dog with a jetpack into a game with a princess with a massive sword? That was my daughter, by the way. So there's no water cooler moment. We all played games from the same universes. We had this limited experience. And actually, as the kids age, the same thing's happening. You look at cultural tribes from the past. In the UK, we had mods and rockers. I was thinking indie kids and ravers. You had these binary tribes defined by your geography, who you had access to. And teenagers now self-assemble their own identities from a much broader range of sources. It's true in the world of work, too. This lowering of barriers is driving an explosion in small and micro businesses. We had the highest rate of startups in the UK for years last year. I think we had 600,000 startups in the UK. In the US, 60% of net job growth is people starting up on their own. Because you can. You can pull out your phone. You can now get a business bank account in 20 minutes, which has been a massive change. You can register online. You can set up your website, you can start your marketing campaign, you can source your suppliers, you can do it all from a phone in no time at all. And then we have performance. If acceleration, which I started talking about, is about more rapid strategic change, performance is about more rapid operational change. We just have to be more responsive to customers and to market signals than we ever have been before. I'll give you a great case study this from the UK. Was anybody here a One Direction fan? There we go. I knew there's one. I guarantee some people in here, or possibly their children, he was a One Direction fan. Does that mean anything to think? No? Good. Anyway. One Direction had just released a new range of Easter merchandise, including these Easter eggs, into a supermarket in the UK called Lidl, a German supermarket. And this was a big thing for Lidl. It was a discounter. It didn't really have big brand stuff. They were very proud of this. They had this huge social media campaign going, promoting these One Direction Easter eggs in their stores. And then one day the social media person sat there knocking out her tweets when she notices something. The hashtag, by Zayn. Uh-oh. Zayn Malik's left One Direction, causing tears from teenage girls across the world. And she turns to her colleague in merchandising and says, Zayn's gone from One Direction. What are we going to do? And her cool, calm and collected friend turns around and says, well, 1/5 of the band's gone. We'll have to knock 1/5 of the price off. And a colleague on Twitter says, great, I'll get a tweet out. And she does. That whole process, that massive commercial decision, that massive brand decision, Took 20 minutes. Now, I met one of the board members of one of our biggest supermarkets in the UK the other day. And I said to her, I talked to her about this. I said, could you do this? Bear in mind, this was 2015. This is 3 years ago. I said, could you do that today? She said, not even close. But that is the level of performance, the level of turnaround, that accelerated decision-making we have to have now to succeed. Now, the scary bit about this is that expectation. Our expectation as customers and consumers is portable. So I do a lot of work in government. What's terrifying government right now, and the government digital people, is that the expectations for their performance are not set by other people in government or people's experience of their local authority. It's set by Amazon and Facebook and Depop and eBay. Our expectations are totally portable. And the last one of these things is disintegration. As technology breaks down barriers, it changes the shape of our organizations. If we wanted to build a successful organization in the past, we used to build pretty much a monolith. We'd integrate things. Whereas now, because technology brings down the friction in the interfaces between us, we can build networks instead. And the company that really understands this, that always understood this from about 2002, is Amazon. Back in 2002, Jeff Bezos sent one of his infamous memos around the whole business at Amazon. Infamous because I don't know if anybody's heard, but you don't disagree with Jeff Bezos. His word is law. And what he said was, stop talking to each other. We don't want to be another Walmart. We don't want all these conversations going on, the business built on unstructured relationships across the business. Every single functional unit of your organization must wrap itself in a layer of software. You must publish every single service you offer through that software. You must describe it to a level of clarity that even people outside the business could access it and use it just as if they're a part of Amazon. AWS, the cloud that Alok was talking about earlier, that's the result of that. That was basically part of Amazon's IT department until Jeff Bezos said, wrap it in software, publish access, let everyone access it as if it was a Lego building block that they can plug into their own business as if they were part of Amazon as well. Networks, not monoliths. So what do you do about this? What can your response be? There's a number of things. I like to talk about this idea of athletic organizations. Organizations that are future ready share 3 critical characteristics with athletes. I know we've got at least one athlete in the room. We've had long conversations with Mike about long cycle rides. What are these 3 characteristics? First of all, great athletes have heightened senses. They are hyper-aware of their environment, both what's around them and what's ahead of them. They use that awareness to drive strategy, and they respond very quickly in the moment. After last night, I'd love to give you a great example from the world of hockey. But I'm British, and we know absolutely nothing about hockey. The only name I recognized last night was Gretzky, and that was a push, to be honest. What does this mean? So you've got to have that strategic awareness, a formal process of foresight for looking beyond the normal bounds of the organization. If you've been inside an organization for more than 6 months, you've got blinkers on. However good you are, however well-read, however much you engage with the world around you, I'm sorry, but the blinkers have probably come down a bit. Your horizons are limited to what's going on in your organization, what's going on in your sector. The scariest words I ever hear from a client are, that doesn't work here, or this industry is different. The only way to break out of that thinking and to recognize what's coming is to have a formal process that forces you to do it. To look beyond, to say, what's coming around the corner? What are the people in adjacent sectors doing? What do the macro trends mean for us? And not just do it every 5 years. The risk when I talk about this is that people find a nice hotel, typically one with a golf course I've found in the past, and they go and do a corporate away day every 5 years to go and do some blue sky thinking. And they put lots of post-it notes on the wall. That's not what I'm talking about. Every 6 months, formal process, what's going on? And you've got to have that operational awareness as well. Be really responsive to market signals and customer feedback. Which I'm sure you all are, right? Okay, that's scary. Now, when you get that feedback, you've got to do something with it. You've got to make decisions faster. We did some serious analysis in one of my clients. How long it took for information to come into the organization, to get through all the various layers of committees to an actual decision maker, and then back out again. The answer was 12 weeks. I don't think that's as atypical as we all might like to think. 12 weeks. Now, it's no good making those decisions fast if they're not sound. So you've got two options. You either accelerate the flow of information to the decision makers, and while you're doing it, by the way, make sure that information isn't getting overly polished on the way. Too often there's some CYA exercises on the path. People want to know what CYA stands for? Yeah. See a lot of that. The other option, instead of accelerating the flow of information, is just push the power out to the edge of the organization. Now, this is scary. It scares people up the organization. But I tell you what, it's an awful lot cheaper than accelerating the flow through it, and it's often more effective. Yes, it carries risks, but if you really want to be responsive, push power out to the edge of the organization. And then you've got to train for action. You've got to be ready to respond when the decision calls for it. That comes down to a lot of things. It comes down to the culture of the organization. It comes down to the structure of the organization as well. Remember what I said about Amazon? How it's network, not a monolith? Amazon's like a big box of Lego bricks. If they decide to build something, they can build it up very quickly. But if they decide to knock it down again, like they did with their wine business, it's just taking one brick away because all the others are common to the rest of the business. This is a big transformation process for a lot of people. That's increasingly the way that agile businesses are going. Boxes of Lego bricks, not little die-cast toy cars. So what can you do now? What can you actually take away from this event and go back to your organizations and do? I think there's 3 really practical things you can do. First one is about information readiness. This has become, ever since I started working with Prophix a couple of years ago, this has become an absolute mantra of mine. The compliance, the critical information, the availability of that information, the reports in which it's packaged should never, ever be a process. Whenever you want that information, it should be there. Critical information should be a state. We are ready. We are ready for audit. We are ready for M&A activity. We are ready for that board meeting that I was talking about. Get it automated and it's there. Shouldn't require months of work to answer business questions, not frequent business questions. And what can you do if you do that? You don't just save the frustration, the 82 hours spent over the weekend trying to satisfy the needs of that board member. You free time to focus on the future. That formalized foresight I was talking about, this is where that time comes from. The second thing you can do is start to break out of the silos and start to build collaboration. The thing I love about finance, about the accounting function particularly, is that it's always been evidence-based. I talk about it as the home of truth in business, because we all know there's a bit of fuzz in any discipline, but it's probably the one most rooted in fact. For all the advances that marketing's made over the last few years in terms of being data-driven and analytics, nothing brings cold, hard truth down in a more real sense than cash. So spread that discipline of evidence-based decision-making. Use the skills that you have of financial planning analysis as the basis for collaboration with other teams across the business. Build those conversations, but on a shared platform of evidence and data. And maybe that's the way you start to push some of those decisions out to the edge of the organization. That risk that everyone's so concerned about is a lot easier to swallow if those decisions are being taken on the basis of data, not instinct. And then that foresight piece. Break out of those narrow horizons. As I said, so often I hear, that won't work here. This organization's different. Or I hear people talking about their competitors and what their competitors are doing. That screen of companies that I put up, who'd all failed to respond, they all had their eyes on the competitors. To use a driving analogy, it's like imagining that all the biggest threats to you are in your rearview mirror. They're not. The biggest threats are the intersections of other people coming onto the road ahead of you. All those companies were not taken out by the direct competitors. They were taken out by incoming threats, from disruption, from completely unrelated or adjacent sectors. Any foresight exercises you do, any planning, any consideration has to go beyond your company, beyond your sector, and beyond the next 12 months. Don't worry about 20 years, but think about that 18 months to 5-year time frame. That, for me, is the near horizon now where most of this change comes from. And don't just think about one future. So often, planning is just last year plus or minus 5%. It's a long and rancorous exercise to get to that point sometimes, but that tends to be the basis. Consider multiple scenarios. You've got the tools to do it. And be clear. Be clear in your communications across the organization. Bring together marketing, sales, finance, and use the platform that you have to give them clarity about the reality of the situation. To come back to this point, we're in an age of high-frequency change. You'll hear historians knock back the idea of accelerated change, an idea that's become very popular in the last few years, because of this sense we all have that things are moving faster now. And there's some great analyses, the likes of Robert J. Gordon saying, no, change isn't happening faster. Look at the last century. But for me, the last century was about those changes of giant magnitude, not changes of high frequency. If you want to respond to that high frequency change, driven by and underpinned by technology, you've got to start thinking and acting like an athletic organization. To recap, build those heightened senses. Strategic. Be aware of what's going on. in the environment around you. Look to the intersections, not just in the rearview mirror. An operational awareness. Be very, very closely connected to customers. Watch those numbers of what's happening, what's changing in those markets. Be ready to respond to them. Accelerate decision-making. Make sure information flows quickly through the organization, or even better, push power out to the edges. Trust people empowered by data and evidence-based decision-making to do the right thing. And then start to think about how you can change the organization to respond more rapidly, to be more flexible. It's a big change. It's going to take time. But we're going to have to start to do it. Because this is the new reality. High-frequency change is the new reality. And it's only continuing to accelerate. And that, I think, is me. Thank you very much.